welcome to another informative and intriguing edition of our Perspectives program. My name is Adedoyin Odunfa, and today we'll be talking about a very topical issue for African economies. We're going to be talking about how to ensure sustained performance for organizations, for nations as a whole. Africa as a continent is blessed with vast natural resources, whether we're talking about oil or gas or minerals or precious stones or semi-precious stones. There's so many natural resources. And probably most importantly is the people. We've got a lot of people. Nigeria in particular is known as the most populous African black nation worldwide. And so you've got people everywhere. It's therefore a paradox that despite all of these natural resources, we still struggle with the challenge of converting these resources into wealth. Indeed, we find that our own abilities are somewhat restricted in being able to take our own resources and convert them into something that is of benefit to our nations and our continent as a whole. Most challenged probably, or at the root of all of this, is the human aspect. Yes, we've got a lot of people, but some will argue that the weak human capacity and capability in African nations is the root cause of a lot of the challenges, the developmental challenges that we face. Indeed, if you look at the UN definition for capacity, it describes it as the ability of individuals, organizations, and systems to perform appropriate functions effectively, efficiently, and sustainably. And we see our capacity and capability development challenge reflected in all spheres of governance and the economy. It shows up in our politics, it shows up in our policies, in business, and overall development. Without doubt, this impacts performance, whether it's on an individual level, an organizational level, or a national level. Could this then be the case of water everywhere, but none to drink? So that challenge of Africans, the challenge that African economies face for development, essentially sets apart economies, sets apart nations, and we begin to categorize them into developed, less developed, and indeed least developed nations. So we can argue that if we focused on enhancing the capacity and capability of our human resources, perhaps everything else will fall in place. The UNH Human Development Index links human development to progress and performance in life expectancy, in knowledge and education, and in the standard of living. Is it a surprise then that most African economies lag behind in these indices? In the 2013 UN Human Development Index, Nigeria was rated 153 out of 186 countries rated worldwide. The World Bank's Knowledge Economy Ratings finds us as number 119 overall. So it is a formidable challenge. What can be done about this formidable challenge? How can African economies, how can they begin to ensure that they have performance that is sustainable? They're improving and they're enhancing the performance at various levels, individual, professional, organizational, and national. How can we ensure that this performance is enhanced on a sustainable level? My guest today has taken up the performance improvement mantle very seriously. Her experience, her orientation is focused on helping organizations institutionalize learning so that they can improve their own performance. So join me in welcoming Dr. Lucy Newman. Thank you so much for finding time to join us, Lucy.
Thank you for the invitation.
Thank you, Lucy. Dr. Lucy Newman is the MD CEO of FITC. That's an institution that's charged with the responsibility for developing capacity for the financial institutions sector. Dr. Newman presents a hybrid of development finance, private sector banking, consulting, and academic orientation. All of this is cumulated to making her a performance improvement expert. She today sits on the global board for the Institute of Performance Management globally. She's had 26 years of experience in the industry, and under her watch, the FITC was placed 7 out of the 225 organizations in Nigeria as the great place to work. As a non-profit organization, this is indeed very impressive. FITC has also been awarded the Innovation in Training Excellence Award by Aspire, the BID Gold Award for Service Quality, and most recently, the International Federation of Training and Development Award as the Change Agent in Africa. Very impressive credentials, we would say. So, Lucy, can you start by telling us the business of FITC and how you think that this has impacted the financial institutions sector across Africa, with specific reference on improving organizational performance?
Adedoyin, thank you for the beautiful introduction. FITC is a child of necessity. Back in the late 1970s, the federal government of Nigeria considered the financial services sector the pivot for development in the country. So based on that, the federal government constituted the Pius Okibo Committee. The committee reviewed the financial services sector as at that time, and they came out with two strong recommendations, and one of the recommendations led to the creation of FITC. The two recommendations were that given the way the financial service sector was as at that time, most of the players were foreign, they were not indigenous, and the indigenous organizations were not doing too well, and for the financial service sector to take the place that it's supposed to be, that capacity should be a key issue. So for that to happen, two things were recommended. The first one was that the tertiary institutions in Nigeria were supposed to start providing courses in areas that will feed the financial services sector in the years to come as at that period. So courses like actuarial sciences, insurance, banking and finance, and all these technical skills that feed the financial services sector were introduced in tertiary institutions. Then the second recommendation was that the working adults in existing financial institutions as at that time needed an institution to support that capacity building for working adults in the place of work. That led to the creation of FITC. Now, given that thrust, FITC's focus therefore was learning for adults, and with a bid to make sure that over the period, Nigerians take up leadership positions in financial institutions. As at that time, Nigerians were basically performing the roles that are now currently outsourced in the industry. They were tellers, cashiers, and doing the front desk work, while the foreigners were playing the key technical roles. And the Nigerian banks and the institutions were not doing too well, and all of them were competing in the same market with the big international organizations. So the approach that FITC took was to use and work with those who were currently in the financial institutions as facilitators and supporters. And FITC started out as a training institution. Later on, we found out that because it was a child of necessity, we had to do training in terms of evidence-based. So we were coming up with programs based on observed weaknesses in the system from the examination and supervision. That led us into the research aspect of what we do. And because we approach training with that thinking, is always very scary and almost result-oriented, then we started getting involved in consulting, which is providing the support to make those things work. So over the period, looking back now, FITC, 32 years, the fact that almost all banks are led by Nigerians, top management of Nigerian banks are Nigerians. We see Nigerian banks breaking the grounds in other markets in Africa and dominating those markets. While not taking credit for everything, we feel that we've been part of that process, and we're very excited about the trend of things. And over the years, we've had to be there for the financial institutions, and whenever they needed that, that's why we're membership-based and non-profit because of the thrust of how we work.
Excellent. There must have been challenges. What have those challenges been?
One of those challenges are actually two big ones. One of the key challenges are that FITC is not a regulator per se, but if you look at our board, our membership is both the operators and both the regulators. So the first challenge is maintaining balance, not being the voice of the regulator or voice of the operator, but maintaining that neutral perspective to be able to see things objectively in the wider interest of the system and for long-term rather than short transactional perspectives. Then the second challenge is in our own continuous capacity building and enhancement. If we're going to be there to provide support, to provide thought leadership, we must also either develop at the same rate or ahead of our stakeholders, while ensuring that we remain steadfast and earn the respect of our stakeholders. So these two issues have been the sustained challenge through the life of FITC for over 3 decades.
Well, given the enviable number of awards that FITC has received, it would seem that you're handling these challenges quite effectively. What would you say is responsible for all of those awards and all of the commendations that FITC has received over the years?
The first one that I like to speak about is, first of all, favor and grace that we have to do the things that we do. But FITC structure is unique. We have a board that is made up of the organizations we serve. It's such a blessing to have your customers on your board. Then you know what they need and you can actually advise beyond the service level. The other part of it is that we are membership based, and with that opportunity, the regulators are on the board, so they make sure that the issues that come up in the industry, the boards that they sit on do not have those issues. So FITC serves as an example of how things should be done, and that is a good strength. The other one is that FITC is non-profit and is an interventionist organization. So for the staff that work in FITC, they get a good feeling of doing what is right, giving back, and in the course of that, building a career. So that comes with a special feeling of feeling good at the course of your work and being paid for it. The other aspect is that by our structure, we're non-profit. So we have the benefit of being small, yet we have a large pool of specialists that work with us. We maintain them as associates, and some of them are very senior, highly experienced people that have served the industry, they have retired, but they're still interested in the industry and they're willing to support. And we have all these people from all over the world. Right now we have a pool of over 350 people in various spectrum of the entire value chain of financial services sector in multiple regions around the world that we could pull on for any project we need to deliver while remaining our small, compact self.
Excellent, interesting. Recently, FITC blazed the e-learning trail by launching a few courses on the e-learning platform.
Yes.
What is propelling this initiative? Is it something we can expect to be sustained?
We launched about 3 services. We have training, consulting, and research. So in research, we launched the virtual library, and in recruitment, in terms of consulting, we launched the e-recruitment platform. And then in the learning bit, we launched the virtual learning. Now, the virtual learning came along with 2 courses, the credit administration and the other one that is bank inspection and internal control. This choice of courses were informed from evidence that we have gathered over the years. I had said earlier that our services are evidence-based. We've been collecting data on fraud and forgeries of banks for 13 years. And over the time, we've seen a pattern of how frauds are committed in the financial services industry and how funds are lost. So we have looked at the regulatory requirements and the ways that banks are supposed to be controlled, and we introduced the bank inspection and internal control module. Now, the other one is that we've done a study with the Nigerian Deposit Corporation on credit practices on banks. We're supposed to be launching that book very soon, and we found out that we need to go back to the C's of credit, and we felt the way we could support that is to introduce the 2 courses, with the second one on credit administration. We also recognize that as Nigerian banks are growing in Africa, they're resourcing from all over the world, and they take experts from outside the country, and some of them are not familiar with the regulation required in banking, and they resume and take leadership positions and take decisions on issues. So the virtual learning gives people in diaspora globally access to the basic issues to make a career in banking in Nigeria. If they can understand bank inspection and internal control, and they can also understand credit administration, so they have the hub of what is required to thrive in a bank, either in Nigeria or anywhere that is a Nigerian bank that is spreading out. So that's what informed the virtual learning.
Is this something we can expect to be sustained?
Yes, they will be sustained. As I had explained earlier, our programs and products are based on evidence, and when we see the need in the market, we're going to introduce additional programs. Already we have indications of likelihood of 1 or 2 more courses within the next few years.
That's very interesting. As your partner in e-learning, I know that you had gone through a fairly rigorous process. What practical advice do you have for those organizations out there looking to use e-learning as a basis to institutionalize learning and therefore improve the organization's performance.
One practical advice, the first one, is that it's not a fast food arrangement project.
I like that.
You know, I'm saying that because also in Africa we have this impatience. We don't take time to develop things, which is a marked difference from the Asians who would take 10 years researching a product. It takes time, and all stakeholders are important. And also being sure of the facts that are creating the need. As much as possible, the consumers of the e-learning must see the need for the e-learning. The other aspect again is that it is an investment. It's not something you write off in one financial year. It's an investment you make that you will amortize over a period of time, depending on how you treat your assets. Most organizations treat virtual learning investments or expense like an expense that they will write off at the end of 1 year. So because of that, they see the cost involved and they think it's too expensive. If you look at it as an asset that you're acquiring as an LMS that you need to write off for some years, then you will see the need to invest properly. The other type is also you need continuity of the parties involved. We have turnover issues, people leave and new people come to the project, and whenever you have a new set of people on the project, you take the project backwards. The other one is the need for creativity. You cannot afford to have how the project will end from the way it starts. You can have a project plan, you can have a project map, but the final product will be discovered along the way. If you have a fixed mind about the end product, you might likely deny yourselves of innovation and new insights. As I said, it's going to be a product. Our own took us 4 years, from 2009. Over the period of these 4 years, you change people and teams come and go. So one of the key issues that you need to look at is the project teams must be as stable as possible. And whenever there's a change, you take the new people on board on the process. And every time you change project teams, you tend to slow down the pace of that project. The other one is that to know that you might have a project plan at the beginning of the project, but you might really not have a clarity on how the end product will be, because if it takes that period over the course of the project, you might have new developments that you might need to incorporate into the virtual learning. And those things are unforeseen, reasonably so, and you need to be open-minded to take them on board. Otherwise, you risk the challenge of taking so long to deliver an LMS, and by the time it's delivered, is a few years behind the current season.
Indeed, wise words. Our guest today, my guest today, has been Dr. Newman, a leader and somebody who has made great strides in her profession and her areas of calling, one of which includes improving organizational performance. So it's been interesting, and I want to thank you so much, Lucy, for finding time out of your very busy schedule to share with us. I've learned a lot, and I'm sure those of you out there have learned a whole lot. Thank you.